Hey guys, welcome to this week's episode. Coach here. We are talking about DIY basics when it comes to retaining wall construction, the materials and how to put it together. We're not getting super fancy. We'll cover some of the fancy stuff, but we're not getting there today. Anyway, I'm glad you're here. Let's get going. Launch. You know, I often see folks on many of the social media platforms when it comes to landscaping and home ownership and problems around the house. And one of them is, what the heck do I do with this hillside? How do I make a retaining wall? How do I put something like that together? And that's what we're discussing here today. We're discussing it at a DIY level so that you can take it on and have the confidence to make sure you get from the starting line to the finish line. You know, in many cases, hillside, whether downhill or uphill stabilization, can be a very important part and a serious part of home ownership and property management. It really can. We've all seen various news footages and pictures and clips of landslides and mudslides and poor drainage, etc., that has wreaked havoc on people's personal residential property. I'll tell you up front, retaining walls are not a simple task, but they are a very doable task if you bite off a little bit of that elephant one bite at a time and you don't try to think the whole thing through and do it all in a day, because it generally does not happen. So let's get into it. Here are some of the materials and the easiest approach to take when building a retaining wall right out of the gate. You know, one of the things about uphill slopes and doing retaining walls for them is that an uphill slope, especially from your backyard and you're looking up at the hillside that you're going to plan on putting a retaining wall at the base of, is a great landscape palette. You can't get a better looking landscape palette because that whole palette is literally tilted in your face every single day. And done right, it can be the most beautiful part of your entire front and backyard. Now, jumping off into retaining walls, I'm going to cover about 5 steps that are super important. The first step is a dig back. And when I say a dig back, I'm talking about taking the base of your wall, the bottom of that slope, and you're going to dig back into that hillside just a little bit. All the tailings, all the soil that you're excavating out of there, you're going to take and throw uphill. And that is later going to be some of your backfill. Once you get back into that hill, say 1 feet, 2 feet, something like that, that's about all you need depending on the height and rise of your hill and how long it is. We're going to talk about multiple walls here in just a minute. Now, once you get that dig back and your soil tossed back up, the next step is going to be your trench. And this next step and the first course of your block, your stackable block that we're going to be using, is everything in this build. It is the be-all and end-all. Get this right and your wall will be stable, it will be good looking, it will be professional, and it will be there for years and years. Get it wrong or do it half-assed and you're going to be fighting problems and an ugly wall for years and years. So we're going to dig a trench. We're going to dig a trench a minimum of probably about 12 inches deep. And we're going to make it a little wider than your block. Now, since we're dealing with a retaining wall and not just a decorative landscape wall, like for a raised bed or something, we're going to be using those big stackable blocks, the ones that are 70 to 80 pounds a piece. There's going to be a lot of weight we're going to put in on the top of this trench. Now the trench is dug. You've leveled it the length of your project. We're going to hypothetically say it's 50 feet long, okay? And you have dug this trench, a nice square bottom trench, not a rounded trench, a nice square bottom trench. And you've leveled it with your big level as much as you possibly can. Now you're going to go get yourself a load of road base or AB base or crusher run, whatever they call it in your area, and you're going to line that trench up about 6-8 inches. 6-8 inches of your 12-inch trench. You're going to fill that trench up. And with that, you're going to level it again, back and forth, and you're going to tamp it down. You're going to tamp it down as hard as you can. I would even suggest throwing a little bit of water in it as you're tamping and get a very hard, compacted surface. Once that's done, your level is going to go on that, and you're going to check it all the way down. If you're really good at laser leveling, here's your chance. Take that story pole and go all the way down the thing and make sure you get a tone all the way through and you know you're perfectly level. If you don't have something like that, then just start with a 4-foot level and just go along all the way down. And get one of those little torpedo levels and just check the level, the front of the trench to the back of the trench. Make it as level as you can. All right, enter the block. Enter onto the stage your stackable block. Now the way I used to do it by starting in the center of my project, my retaining wall, and I would move out to the ends. And I just found it to be a little easier that way. That way I would just cut at any blocks that needed cutting. I would cut them at the ends and they weren't quite as visible. So maybe you might want to take that same approach. So placing your first block. The key to this whole thing is level, front to back, side to side. And getting that with a torpedo level or a little 2-foot level, whatever you can fit on there comfortably. And once it is level and you've tapped it in place just a little bit with a dead blow hammer or a rubber mallet. We'll show you a couple of pictures of those right here and right here. Once that is level, you're going to start off in both directions. Remember, you got 75 pounds or so that you're going to have to hump back to your job site. Maybe the delivery of that block came to your driveway and your project's in the backyard. Don't overthink it. Just a little bit at a time. 2 or 3, 4, 5 in your wheelbarrow and get them back to your job site. Your second stone should be level also, not only with your first stone, your first block, but also on its own as well, front to back, side to side. Once you get that, we move on and we move out. Every single one of these, this is the most important part of your wall, and you need to make sure it is perfect. Not good enough, not okay. No, every single one of them is level to each other and level in that trench. Take your time at this phase because it is everything to your project. Do the entire 50 feet or whatever you have. Once it is done, make sure that you let it sit overnight. Believe it or not, things do settle out even overnight a little bit, especially if you get a little bit of rain, like what we got here today. Now, what we're talking about is once that first course is in, you're home free. Your second course is going to go on. Make sure that you don't stack them on top of each other. You put them in between each block, and at the ends, you're going to cut whatever is necessary. Cut them with, you can do it with a stone chisel. You can do it with a radial saw with a stone blade on it. You can do almost any way that you can find to cut it accurately. You don't want to shatter the block. You do want to have a decent cut. Go up as high as you're going to go. Now, my particular niche, I only did residential yards. And since I was in the flat part of the Central Valley of California, I never really had to do too much. The highest one I ever built was 4 feet tall, but I had to do 2 of them in the hill. We'll talk about multiple walls here in a second. Anyway, 4 feet tall is generally the national average of anything over 4 feet. You're going to have to start talking about an engineering diagram and permits being pulled. So consider that just a little bit. All right, so now you've stacked whatever number of courses that you've had on your wall. It's going to be 3 feet, 4 feet, something like that. And you've gone and got a nice capstone. But don't put that capstone on just yet. One thing we're going to have to address is what goes on behind that wall. Now, if you're where I'm at, and something we're going to show you here in a minute, is the ground here, and possibly at your place, is saturated. Lots and lots of water on your hillside. And you're going to need to control that. You're going to need to control the hydraulic pressures that can build up behind that wall. Do that and do it correctly. there will be no sort of compromise as what you see in the wall that's behind the camera right now. Anyway, what we're going to do is we're going to do a gravel base in the back, generally an aggregate base of minimum of 3/4 in size, and you're going to use a PVC or a corrugated perforated drain line. I like using a geotextile sock. I like wrapping the pipe in that so you don't have any soil infiltration. We're going to start in the middle or possibly at the ends, but generally in the middle, and you're going to taper that gravel to the ends. And as you're tapering it, your pipe is going to go on top of that gravel. And it's going to be a minimum of about 1/4 inch a foot, maybe 1/8 of an inch a foot to get that kind of water. The water will get captured in that perforated pipe and move it away from the wall area, and then you can deal with drainage from the ends, maybe down into your home drain system. Once that pipe is laid in, you've kind of stabilized it a little bit, we're going to backfill it with more gravel. Backfill it and cover it, probably a minimum of a couple inches, so you can't see it. Then take a piece of landscape fabric. Not the cheap crap, get some robust stuff, and you're going to place that on top of the gravel drain system. Hold it down with whatever you can, and now we take our soils and we backfill over the top of this trench, over the top of this gravel. No soil infiltration will get down in there at a great deal if we have a landscape fabric top on it. Now you've taken care of the water problem that could potentially happen behind your wall. Now it's time to backfill. Backfill with all the spoils that you dug out from back digging into the hillside, and bring in whatever else you need. I generally suggest filling it right to the top of your capstone, because Mother Nature is going to settle that loose soil out over the course of the next year or two, and it will drop down. But backfill it right up there. Make sure that you tamp your backfill soils down as much as possible. Now your wall is complete. You should be able to stand back and look at it, and you should be able to look down the level and see it is just perfect, just perfectly level. You've got everything cleaned up. Now it's time to move on to the landscaping portion of your hillside, and that can start with irrigation. You should have had a little design or a little plan, a planting plan drawn up. You should have had some type of irrigation stubbed out at the edges. When I used to do this landscaping thing and I dealt with hillsides, I always brought the water up the sides of the hill, and then I would horizontally lay nothing more than drip tubing. I never did sprays on hillsides or anything else. I always used drip because I didn't want to oversaturate the hill and cause problems. So I put a micro amount of water, the needed water, on the plants and trees that were there, and I used micro sprays for any sort of ground cover application, perennials and annuals. Now let's talk about those multiple walls for a second. Those multiple walls, if you have a longer hillside, probably high enough to where you would have to put a wall 6-7 feet high down at the bottom to retain the whole hillside, let's chop that down just a little bit and make it a little easier. Let's terrace that hillside a bit. Let's go up halfway, or maybe 1/3 of the way up. And what I want you to do is repeat the whole wall again. Dig back into the hillside, throw your spoils up, dig a trench, put your crusher run and your AB base in there, tamp it down, make it as level as possible. Repeat another course of whatever height you need. If you went 4 feet on the bottom course, maybe you only have to do 3 feet on the second course. Once you get that first course on that second wall, then stack it up to that 3-foot level, put a capstone on it, backfill it, and away you go. If you need to do another one up towards the top of the hill, maybe only make it 2 feet tall. Make it 2 feet tall and you got the whole hillside stabilized. The 2-foot one, you probably don't need to do drainage behind it. The 3-foot one in the middle I would, and certainly the one at the bottom. The stackable block is the easiest way for a DIY homeowner to make a good, solid, long-lasting retaining wall. So let's look at a couple of other options. These options I don't get into, but they're there and they've served their purpose many times over if done correctly. All right, the second choice would be wood. Big 8x8 type timbers for posts that we're going to sink in the ground. I used to do it as far as depth of post. I kind of went on a thought process for every foot of vertical retention of the hillside I was going to do, I wanted a vertical foot of hole and cement that I was going to put the post in. So if I had a 3-foot retaining wall, I wanted to try to achieve a 3-foot hole. It didn't always work, but I tried. So big, beefy timbers. Dig your hillside back, just like we did for the block. Dig it back, throw the spoils up, dig your holes, lay it out. I would suggest an 8-foot spacing or maybe a 6-foot spacing, depending on how steep of hill you're dealing with. Will give you a very good retention strength. And then behind it, not in front of it, but behind your post, on the hillside side of the wall, we're going to put in our face boards. This is all going to be ground contact rated type of timber, probably in the way of 1x12s or 1x8s at the very minimum. Maybe a combination so that your height of your wall comes to whatever. It may be 36 inches tall, so you're going to have 1x12s stacked 3 high behind your post. I suggest that you always do double face boards and interweave them. If you have a joint, then the following one is going to be a face board covering that joint. Make sure that you use good timber lock type of screws, or I always suggest drilling through all wood material after tacking it in place and using a good galvanized washer, bolt, and nut combination for good retention. Another tip for longevity is once you get the face of your retaining wall done on your boards, come back with like a 30-pound felt and face that face board with that before you do your drainage and obviously before you do your backfill. Okay, let's move on to another material, and that one's going to be concrete. Concrete is a very stable, very strong type of retaining wall, but it is also the most difficult to put together and put together correctly. What we're going to do is we're going to start the whole process just like all the other materials. We're going to do a dig back, we're going to do a trench. We're going to form that trench this time, and when you form it, one of the things you're going to use towards the end is a key. And a key generally comes in the form of you can lay in a 2x4 or a 4x4 into the trench when you're pouring, and then pulling it out, causing a key to take place in that form. And I'll tell you about that in just a minute. Your whole foundation is going to rest on the levelness of this foundation pour, the key that you're creating with your foundation, and then you're going to form up. After it's set and done, you've rebarred that foundation and you're starting to do the vertical part of your wall. You're going to use plywood, you're going to use wire tie, you're going to use bracing on the outside, because remember, the amount of weight that you're going to be putting in that form is tremendous outer pressure that's going to take place. Then you're also going to wire tie the forms together from front to back, drilling holes through them, putting wire in there and washer ties on the sides. You can see how it starts to get a little complicated. Pouring your wall is the easiest part of it. Making sure it's finished correctly is a little more difficult. You might want to try placing a release agent on the inside of your plywood form, like a diesel spray or an oil spray or a release agent that your concrete supplier has. It will make it much easier when you pull that wall apart after pouring it, so that you can finish at least the visible side of the wall, troweling it off and putting a finish to it of however you've chosen. So concrete, I'm going through it kind of brief because most of my DIY audience is not going to get quite that complicated. All right, so there's our big 3. Stackable block, which I highly recommend for DIYers. You can go the wood route, which I've covered there, and we finished off with concrete. The last one is kind of the fanciest. It's probably the most expensive, and you require some big power equipment to do it. Sourcing it can be kind of hard, but it's one that I used to like to do because it was very decorative in nature. And that's large boulders. Large boulders as a retaining wall, I would not suggest doing really high ones. I would suggest doing like 3-foot ones and using manageable boulders that you can have with a rental equipment, like a small excavator or maybe a medium-sized excavator, to grab onto them with one of the thumb claws and be able to place them. I also suggest using angular boulders and not large river stone. Although river stone can work, and I have used them, they tend to leave large gaps. But there's also a technique that you can do with those large gaps to really make that wall stand out very, very nicely. So stacking your boulders in, I want you to remember one thing. Your base course layer that sits here, I want the second course for you to have a little bit of a setback on that first course. Setback into the hillside. And if you do like a 2-course or a 3-course, it is stepped back into the hillside. So strength is increased and almost doubled. If you stack it just one on top of another, then you end up with the potential of collapse over the years from settling. So big boulders. And then in between those boulders, if you do have some gaps, don't worry about it too much. You're still going to do your drainage behind there. But in those gaps, take some of your improved soil, or if you have good soil on the hillside, pack those gaps with that soil and then come back and plant with ground cover, perennials, and small bulbs. And there's where the beautification really takes place. Really naturalizes that wall quite a bit. Well, guys, DIY basics for retaining wall construction is in the bag right now. I sure do appreciate you sticking around, and I hope if you got some value out of this that you consider subscribing and give me a like. I always appreciate it. If you have any questions regarding a build that you're considering, whether it be retaining walls or something else, always email me at youryardcoach@gmail.com. I'll be glad to handle any questions that come my way. Hey, don't forget our website. We really dive into a deep, deep dive when it comes to retaining walls in the eBook and HOMESCAPE 1.0, the digital course. You might consider perusing that. All right, until next Friday, as always, to your landscape success, I very much appreciate it. If you're on the go, consider listening to the podcast, and Plan of the Week is there every week as well. I'll catch you next Friday. Thanks for tuning in. Bye for now.